World Regions Geography 110 East Asia Part 4 Economic Expansion, the Chinese Model. So China has revolutionized communism by incorporating capitalism within the system. So you have the communist model, but they've allowed some capitalism, but the political party wants to maintain control. So the Chinese Communist Party wants to maintain party control over the economy and the politics, but allow private enterprise with heavy state-run subsidized companies. So a lot of China's economic growth has been because of state-owned industries such as the steel industry, construction, industries that have been highly subsidized by the state. And in the case of China, they've built a number of cities that are capable of having a population of 10 million that are uninhabited. And this has been reported as part of their GDP, but in actuality, it's kind of hollow. And one of the issues that's coming to head is that China is greatly overstated. The Wall Street Journal a couple years ago came out with an article about China overstating its growth, and the question is by how much. Now, the example at the right is the market share of various countries in the global solar energy photovoltaic cell production. You see here in 1995, the dominant producer was the United States. We were technology giant. We were doing it. You see we begin this decline. You see the rise here of Japan taking over production, and then a rather rapid decline starting in the mid 2004, 2005. And you see China starting from virtually none and to quickly ramp up and dominate and crush all the competition. Part of this is due to government subsidies of this and cheap labor. And the problem is going to come at some point in time. The Chinese system is going to have to face a coming to terms with some of the government subsidies. You're starting to see some of that now in Western Europe. In the U.S., there's a suit going on with the World Trade Organization, with U.S. steel companies demanding compensation for Chinese dumping of steel and other products. There's other suits going on all over the world against China. So China started in 2000, quickly emerged as a dominant producer, but it's largely through these subsidies. China is an export-driven economy. So China's economy is based on worldwide consumption of products. 20 years ago, if you went to a store anywhere in the U.S., you would find very little from China unless it was from Taiwan. So China is an export-driven economy dependent on foreign demand. A lot of people wonder why China bought so much U.S. debt in 2008. Well, the reason is very simple. If they didn't buy the debt, the U.S. would stop consuming Chinese goods and China's economy would have collapsed. So it was out of necessity, not out of any particular love for America. Chinese government policy has heavily subsidized certain industries such as the photovoltaic cells, steel and construction materials, dumping excess products on foreign markets, selling below cost because the government's been able to subsidize it, and then crushing foreign competition by doing that. And that crushed foreign competition then allows them to raise the prices. This policy has resulted in the decimation of some industries. You saw in that previous slide the photovoltaic cell industry in the United States, but it's also decimated things like the clothing industry, a lot of manufacturing in the U.S. Industries have been decimated. Steel industry, a lot of construction materials have all been, the industries have been crushed by Chinese dumping and Chinese imports. Trade flows. This is a kind of a map. Map at the right shows trade flows from the Pacific Rim nations to the United States. So this is coming from these countries over here. Trade flow into the U.S. Trade flow into the U.S. 2007. Trade flow in 2015. What you see here, you can kind of see the difference here. 14.4, but what you're really seeing is difference in economy. The world economy is better today than it was in 2007, though 2007 was the beginning of the economic downturn. And so in between here, you've seen some fluctuation between 2007 and 2008, which doesn't show in this, but there is an increase in here partly because the economy is better. But the emerging Pacific Rim nations account for 48% of world trade. So the countries right around here account for 48% of the global trade and 58% of the world gross domestic product. So not only does it produce a high amount, but it's highly profitable. So Chinese economic issues. China has a very uneven distribution of wealth. What you see here is GDP in 2012. Now it's even more exaggerated today than it was at this time, but you can quickly look here and see where the growth is. Very few regions concentrated right here. What these are here, this region is basically the same. Kazakhstan and this region have the same. I guess maybe it's size-wise. I'm not sure exactly why they have these weird names on here. Maybe it's population, I don't know. But historically, in China, this type of uneven development has resulted in political chaos. So this is growth is comparable to these regions. And what you see is a concentration of wealth in a few regions right here, and very little growth in these regions in here. And in China, this type of uneven development has historically ended up in political chaos. In other words, in revolutions, in government collapsing, in overthrows, change of regimes. 600 million Chinese live on less than $2 a day, and I actually think they actually live on less than $1 a day. Chinese wealth is concentrated in coastal regions, in coastal cities, and very few regions. You only have 5 or 6 regions where there's any type of economic growth and any wealth concentration. The rest of the regions are basically poor, and the majority of people have very low standard of living. The Korean economies are a story of opposites. This is North Korea, and this is actually Tibet, but I used it as an example of South Korea because you have more Western, you have a conflict of the traditional and the Western. This here is the North Korean army. It's probably Pyongyang, and so Korea's opposites. North Korea, militaristic, communist, technologically backwards. I know there's a lot in the news about their missile program and their nuclear program, but if you take out a few of those things, the rest of the country is technologically back in the 40s, maybe in early 50s. Um, they lack industry, they have a very poor economy, and they have horrible low agricultural production. Um, Food security is a constant issue in North Korea. Power outages, other than the capital, are fairly constant. They've had some number of projects in capital. I think they built a huge hotel complex that was never completed. Um, the economy, basically, they have no money. If it wasn't for Communist China trading with them and supporting them, they would pretty much collapse economically. The only place they trade is really with uh, uh, Manchuria in northern China. South Korea, on the other hand, is democratic, has a very dynamic economy, technologically advanced. It's an industrial juggernaut, and it has the ability to import foodstuffs. It's relatively wealthy, uh, highly industrialized, um, the polar opposite of the North. Geopolitical issues that are going on in Asia right now. Korea, North and South Korea, the Korean War is still ongoing. A lot of people think the Korean War is over. It's actually a truce, but it could erupt at any time, and that is the constant balancing issue that goes on um, on the Korean Peninsula. China, Taiwan issue, unresolved situation between nationalist China, which is Taiwan, and the communist China since 1949. Communist China considers Taiwan to just be an errant uh, province. Nationalist China doesn't feel that way, and not surprisingly. And so there's a constant conflict there. What has kept that from erupting is U.S. intervention and the U.S. Navy being able to cut off China. China is now beginning to develop a global navy and project itself into the South China Sea, and that's going to become a issue in the future. China, Tibet issues, the issues between the Dalai Lama and China on the status of Tibet. Um, China considers it a province. Tibet considers itself as an independent uh, country. That issue is unresolved since the 50s. China and the South China Sea. This is a new issue that is starting to develop. Chinese claims regarding control of South China Sea could stir a conflict with the United States, Japan, Philippines, and or Vietnam, and is likely to do so in the near future. There is a lot of information about this in the news. China is going out and finding shallow areas in the ocean and building islands and claiming them as Chinese territory and using them in order to claim control of the whole South China Sea. And I think sooner rather than later that will erupt and there will be a confrontation between the United States and China over this issue. It has been to the World Court, and the World Court decided against China, but that has not stopped them from attempting to project control over those shipping routes. And I think that will end up in being a conflict with the U.S. probably in the next 5 years to 10 years.